different types of climates. This is a German fellow named Köppen, and about World War I, right after World War I, between World War I and World War II, he did most of his work, and he took the world's climates and classified them according to 5 generic possibilities. So you have tropical, okay, you see most of the reds there, tropical. Then you have dry regions, not a lot of water there. You can have some temperate regions, so North America would be a temperate zone, and then you can see that in the south, Argentina, Chile, and southern South America. You have continental, so in the middle of a continent where there's very little ocean water there, that's a type, and then you have polar. So those are the 5 major. Then there's all kinds of subcategories. So there's about 30 total of these categories that Dr. Köppen came up with. And so they can be classified broadly and then even more specifically. So this is just North America. You can see that generally North America, you have a kind of like most of southern North America, say Florida up to Ohio and Virginia, has a humid, warm oceanic climate. So you've got lots of water there from the Gulf of Mexico coming up and from the oceans coming up. You can almost tell where the mountains are. West Virginia, for instance, even though the rest of the area is in a light green, West Virginia is in the blues and the grays, which shows you that there's mountains there and that's a higher climate than the general lowland that's around, say, North Carolina or Virginia. You're going to get this very same thing in the Rockies, where you're going to have all of these different types of climates. So they might have the same amount of heat, but different amounts of moisture, or the same amount of moisture, but because one is higher than the other, you have different temperatures. So all of these kinds of climates are like a generic type of aerial climate. So is it cool? Is it warm? Does it have lots of water? Does the water come from the ocean? Is it a mountain climate? Is it dry climate? Is it in the polar regions, etc.? Okay, so here's the basic ones. So the first one would be the tropical ones. So a lot of times tropical regions are close to the oceans. You don't have a lot of broad continents around the equator, for instance. So you have lots and lots of islands. So you have a maritime influence. So you end up with moist, hot air. And so you can end up with lots of like rainforests, etc. Then as you go north and south of the equator, you end up with kind of a transition zone, and it's much drier. So since it's drier, like for instance in those areas in Africa would be savanna land, so broad prairie grasslands that you end up seeing lots of zebra and giraffe, etc. The next basic area would be dry climates. So if you have air masses over a large continent where it's not close to an ocean, then you can have a dry kind of a continental one. So you could have a desert region where it's just very dry, or semi-desert where it's bordering a wetter area, so that it's still it's drier than the normal. But it is bordering a wet area, so it's semi. Okay, so you could have that. Mild climates, you can have 3 basic types of mild climate. We have a mild climate, so you can either have a humid subtropical mild climate like Florida. You can see that, where it's kind of has a winter, but it's not a snowy winter. It's going to maybe a cooler winter. Then you could have a marine west coast. So you're going to have lots of water coming in from the coast, where you'll have mild winters and coolish summers, because the ocean kind of cools off that land, cooler than inland, say. So the same area in California would be cooler than the same area in Arizona, which would be desert. And then you have a Mediterranean, so that would be like the Gulf Coast, etc., where you're going to have like mid-latitude, dryish summers, rainy winters, not cool, not cold winters, but kind of what you would think of as southern Mississippi type of weather. Your continental depends upon how hot it is. Is it a warm summer? Okay, so is it farther down but it's dry? Or is it a cool summer? So is it farther, maybe up a mountain? Or is it subarctic? So is it in northern Canada or in southern Chile, something like that. And then the last one is polar, so really low precipitation, low temperatures. Normally you have dryish, so like for instance in Mongolia, which would be a polar climate, it's nearly a desert, but it's a cold desert. It's not a hot, sandy, dry desert, but it's kind of a cold desert where you don't have a lot of vegetation. And as I mentioned before, you can have tiny little climates to where one hillside is different from the rest of the area. So top of a high mountain, or in a deep glen or a glade, something like that, to where it's protected, shielded by mountains. You might have a climate that's different from all the area 5 miles from there. Okay, so that's called a microclimate. And then similar to a microclimate is a heat island. If you have a city, tons of concrete, then a lot of times that's going to radiate heat differently, and so you're going to end up with hotter summers. So hotter summers in an urban area than in a rural area.